Hello, welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in approximately 1 minute as we admit folks from the waiting room. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Cheryl Gomez, COO and CFO of the study group, and we're really grateful to our panelists and each of you for joining us today. We're really excited for this webinar series exploring an agenda for advancing AI measurement and assessment system innovation. If it's your first time joining us for one of our sessions, the study group exists to advance the best of AI assessment and data, practice technology and policy, and uncover future design needs and opportunities for educational system. For our agenda today, we'll begin with a few housekeeping items and resources, share some context for the webinar series, and explore and then move on to our panel discussion.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Lauren Catuli with the study group. Grateful to have you all here. As you settle in, please put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. I see we have folks from Norway, Turkey, and all over the States. So it's great to see just the range of folks in the room here today. So keep dropping those in. And you can add comments throughout our session today in the chat. You can also use the question and answer feature. We will be recording this session, which will be made available afterward, along with the session materials. We'll drop them in the chat in just a moment as after people are a bit done with putting their names in the chat. And then certainly if you have any questions as we go along the way or need any tech support, you can send me a message directly or send me an email. And I'll turn it back over to Cheryl now. Cheryl, you're on mute.
Thanks. We invite you to sign up to receive our weekly roundup highlighting recent developments and initiatives at the intersection of AI assessment, data, research, and policy, and send us any recommended content. We are actively publishing our Getting Smart series and advancing AI measurement and assessment system innovation. If you have a topic or idea that you're interested in collaborating, we would love to hear from you. This spring sessions focus on assessment system innovation in the multimodal AI era. And in March and April, we'll be exploring innovating what and how we measure. And we invite you to register in the link in the chat for those two sessions. Now we'll turn to hearing from our colleagues about the relevance and significance of today's discussion.
Multimodal AI presents an opportunity to transform how we measure, rebalancing the needs of learners, educators, family, and the wider community.
The future of assessment in education will be found in its capacity to serve, understand, and improve learning and teaching, the processes of both, and certainly their outcomes.
By leveraging the sciences of learning and development, we can drive two things. First, usefulness, improving how well an assessment informs real-world decisions. And second, usability, increasing the ease with which stakeholders can administer, interpret, and use these results.
We need tests to do the following: provide meaningful information, satisfy multiple purposes,
secure fairness, ensure accessibility,
enhance privacy, design for engagement, and have a positive impact.
Successful innovation enhances the value proposition of assessment, reduce burden for teachers, and ensure that they focus on teaching what really matters.
They focus efforts on improvement, monitor for equity and excellence, match to opportunities, and credibly certify experiences, skills, and competencies.
We'll now move to today's panel's discussion. Our moderator, Eric Tucker, will get us kicked off.
Thank you, Cheryl. As president and CEO of the study group, I'll start by conveying how grateful we are for the panelists for joining this conversation, and for each of you for joining both live and asynchronously. Linda, John, Paul, and Ellie, we're delighted to share this time and to learn from and with you. Thank you for your diligent preparation for today. As you know, we'll each have 9, maybe 10 minutes of framing remarks and follow-up questions, including introducing yourself. We'll spend, therefore, about 40 some odd minutes in a high velocity, high value conversation amongst and between this all-star group leading measurement innovation. The session will wrap with a lightning round of closing remarks from each of the panelists. I am missing the opportunity to say kind, nice things about panelists. So if you'll, because they'll be introducing themselves as they share their remarks. So if you'll permit one point of personal privilege. Each of the panelists today are personal heroes of mine, and I could spend the hour saying what I love about their work. I won't introduce each of them, but I'll share words of appreciation about one of them and invite you to share kind words about our panelists, any that you choose, in the chat. Before we get going today, I want to specifically thank Linda Darling-Hammond. For 30 years, her applied research has oriented my own professional work towards what matters most. She's treated like family fellow travelers, including the visionary behind the Handbook for Assessment in the Service of Learning series, Professor Edmund Gordon. And we've all had the great and good fortune to meet her family as well as they work to make a difference in the world, inspired, no doubt, by Linda's values. Linda, I'm grateful for your contributions to the struggle for human dignity and to share this time with you, as I'm sure many of our guests here today are grateful for many folks on the panel. So without further ado, want to, and moving to the next slide, say today's sessions grow from chapters by Linda, John, Ellie, and their colleagues, as well as 2 pieces from Paul. We really encourage you to dig in to that substance. We'll start with reflections from Ellie.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Ellie Mokir-Horner, and I'm on the early learning team here at the Gates Foundation. At the Gates Foundation, we consider early learning as being focused primarily on pre-K, even though we know the field has defined that as birth to grade 3. We are focusing exclusively on pre-K because we know that kids who enter kindergarten ready to learn and have a positive relationship with school enjoy benefits throughout their academic careers and throughout their lives. So we believe that one of the ways we can improve outcomes for all children is to make sure that we have good information on what programs help the most kids start kindergarten ready for success. One thing I want to note, though, is that technology is moving really, really quickly, but the needs in the classroom are actually evolving at a much slower pace. So the way that we thought about improving the way that assessments are operating in the preschool environment was to start by grounding in the real needs of a classroom. So we started this process with we call it a target product profile process, where we brought together, parents and teachers, educators and administrators, policymakers and system leaders, assessment suppliers, and yes, traditional experts, academics and psychometricians, to best understand what would need to be true so that assessments could achieve a brand new vision for improving both what educators know about the kids in their classroom, but also what system leaders know about what's working for whom and under what conditions. The reason why we set it up this way is because we believed that if we grounded in the needs, the static needs of actual classrooms, then we could also create an aspirational vision for the future that allowed technology to continue to allow us to progress towards those goals without becoming a solution in search of a problem, making sure that we are always grounded and anchored in what is true developmentally for these children and in terms of the realities of these classrooms. And so from there, we came up with these user-informed principles of success, which were, anchored to quality features, sufficiently ambitious, allowed for tension between parameters. So, you can imagine an assessment that's, for example, like, really, really effective, but extremely expensive to implement. That we ignored those tensions for the purposes of this document and said, okay, it needs to be affordable and it needs to be valid and reliable. We laid out parameters of what would be minimally acceptable for each category. And really importantly, engaged in design thinking, there's a famous saying that if you had asked people in the 1920s before the Model T what they needed, they would have said a faster horse. So really trying to make sure we were anchoring on an idea of what would you need this to be successful versus what do we think that means in terms of what's currently possible. And because things are changing so quickly, we've had the opportunity to update and refine and reframe for different audiences, and also as technological innovations have helped us better understand what that minimum category should be. We can go to the next slide. So here's what we learned, and that this document is widely available, and we are in the process of updating it as we speak, which we found from our conversations with lots and lots of experts that people really wanted an assessment that covered the key skills that are being developed during an early educational experience. So that, of course, includes early literacy, early math, language acquisition, and executive function. We also believe that there needs to be additional research in how we capture early exposure to science and technology, other types of approaches to learning, and then social skills and well-being. But for all of those categories, we heard clearly from the field that these needed to be really fun, developmentally appropriate, child-led activities, not only for form, but also for function, because it also allows educators to implement this at a much lower burden. We heard that it had to be psychometrically sound for all of the populations in public pre-K, which is where we think about fairness as well. We heard it had to generate really timely insights at the various altitudes that people were using these data to make decisions. And we heard that it had to be feasible to implement with fidelity across a wide variety of different types of contexts. We can go to the next slide, where I have added thought bubbles as to the ways in which we're seeing technology help us surpass what we thought was possible only a few years ago. So, for example, automatic speech recognition is improving dramatically and quickly, although much less quickly than I would for the age groups that we focus on than for other groups, but it's moving. And it could allow us to capture content that was currently infeasible to capture validly and reliably at scale, such as language acquisition, language use, and other ecologically valid, so other ways in which kids are using skills in the real world. We also have heard about tools that can improve the way children are experiencing these assessments. At the time when we kicked this work off, we imagined kids spending very short bursts of time on tablets, but there are also now wands that can be used with textbooks, with real books, or augmented reality opportunities to leverage kids' activities in the real classroom environment. We've certainly learned a lot about the greater adaptivity of assessments that are possible as AI can deduce what types of misconceptions kids are making and offer them little bits of support so they stay in the zone of proximal development. AI-generated insights is another area of tremendous opportunity. It can even there's a retrieval augmented generation can tie assessment results to specific curricula in the field and provide just-in-time advice and curricular interventions to educators. And what we've really been hoping for is the idea of allowing assessments that can be administered with enough classroom relevance and inexpensively enough and low burden enough that they can support teachers in their day-to-day instruction while still providing information that can be meaningfully aggregated to reduce the total amount of assessment that is required in the classroom. Because as my old boss used to say, you can't fatten up the pig by weighing it every day. The goal here is assessment for service so that educators can spend as much time as possible actually supporting the knowledge acquisition for these young kids. I have purposefully kept my remarks as short as I can, so I am available for questions now.
Okay. So
You can pull the slides down if you
yeah,
want.
so first question, and thank you for those remarks. Including more modalities. So speaking, listening, drawing, writing, playing, digital interactions, click streams, etc., has at least the potential to enable students to better demonstrate what they know and can do, which may mean that we have assessments that are more accurate and fair, and hopefully also that are more useful. What are some of the bright spots that you're noticing that leverage maybe unexpected modalities or underutilized modalities in ways that have real potential?
That's a great question. Some of the ways in which I've seen these multimodal tactics used for assessments that I had, not expected necessarily are around screening tools. For example, we have a partner who has been leveraging phonetic based automatic speech recognition to be able to screen children for speech pathologies, which is, a major equity issue in our country. Children who are experiencing poverty are many times more likely to have unmitigated speech pathologies because there is a small window for therapy to improve how children are able to use their palates. So that's an example of a way in which these technologies are bringing really useful information to families that they can use to advocate for the needs of their kids while also reducing the financial burden associated with these screenings.
And then for those who are listening at home, who want to learn more about the user informed principles and the types of technical product innovation they're enabling, where might they learn more?
Oh, absolutely. We can provide, I'll make sure to give you the link to our most recent version of the user-informed principles. And we will also make it available our most recent version that is being updated to account for changes in what's possible. And so improvements in what we consider the minimum features of quality. So that's been very exciting. That's something I recommend that anybody who is thinking about what assessments might be of best service to their project, if it's a research project or if it's like a policy decision, really think through whether or not there are features of quality that have not been on your radar and make sure that you're considering the wide variety of quality features that the field has shared with us.
Look forward to returning to you once we get the table set. Now we'll turn to Paul.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning all, at least for any of us who are still enjoying morning. One more, please. There. I'm going to begin by risking the offense of my fourth grade teacher, Miss Grundy, who used to tell me often not to begin with the conclusion. That's exactly where I'm going to begin. We have at the Carnegie Foundation, up until recently, for the last decade and a half or so, been thinking about how research, measurement in particular, can meaningfully inform improvement of practice. It is in that sense a special case, or maybe it's the general case of which assessment in the service of learning is a special case when the practice that concerns us is instruction, teaching and learning in particular. We've been working on the application of improvement science, as we call it, and to be completely confessional, improvement science is continuous improvement adapted and then adopted into the education setting, adapted for and adopted into the education setting. And you see here 3 resources if you'd like to dig deeper into this. The one in the middle, Learning to Improve, is the first book that lays out 6 principles from which I will speak in explaining our thinking about measurement, practical measurement for improvement. To the left is a compendium of 7 different approaches to improvement science, all of which we think qualifies, though none of which does everything we might suggest all the time. But so it is in the way of the world. But 7 different approaches to legitimate forms of improvement science. And to the right, the most recent book focuses on practical measurement for improvement in particular. Next slide, please. So a few comments on the place from which we come around for all of this thinking. And I really don't care to insult anybody by reading to you, and I kept the reading brief. So I'm just going to point out a couple of things that I think are important. One is that this is theory-driven. We refer to a theory of practice improvement. There are tools for developing a theory, coherent theory of practice improvement. There are tools for making that theory scientifically sound. So for each of these things that I'll speak to, there's quite a bit in those books that I put up there behind the process in process terms behind what is labeled there. But the important thing is you don't just work on what feels best. You work on that which makes sense in the context of an examination of the problem, the application of tools for understanding the problem, and then the development of a theory of practice improvement that addresses the problem. So being theory-based in that sense is an important thing that qualifies the activity as a science. One then innovates, plans interventions, whether those are big and complex or minute bits of instruction approached in one way or another. You then innovate, and then through iterative testing, what in continuous improvement is referred to often as plan, do, study, act cycles. One measures and addresses what is learned from doing that measurement. And this leads us to what's referred to as a family of measures in order to have a lock on the impact of the question, on the impact of the innovation that you are testing. You need to know at least 3 things that are significant. One is, was the intervention, the activity implemented largely as planned? If it deviated, how so and where? 2, what came of that intervention, the outcome measures. And 3, what else? What other impacts may have been observed, positive and negative? Now, we have something of an ear for identifying, or an eye for identifying, the so-called unanticipated consequences. That's what these are, but there is the reminder that they can come in positive and negative, and one needs to know what else happens when you implement your innovation. Only by bringing to bear in practical, work-embedded ways measures of these things does one fully explore through this iterative testing process innovations that are of interest? Next slide, please. So measurement for improvement, practical measurement for improvement. You can't say it enough. It is tied to the theory of improvement. One is measuring. It is meaningful, intuitively meaningful. And the book Measuring to Improve has an entire chapter on validity, various forms thereof, and how they apply to practical measurement for improvement. And one of its messages is that face validity is not so trivial as many psychometricians would have you believe, because the fact that you don't tend to quantify face validity or describe it with complex models, mathematical models, doesn't mean that it isn't important to motivating, informing, and creating action on the part of people who matter the most, the practitioners that you intend to influence with this effort. Face validity, and there's an entire section there, is worth the investment, to put it mildly. It's actionable. It's minimally burdensome. Goes without saying. But we tend, whenever possible, to take it even further. It's embedded in practice. When it happens as a natural consequence of practice, or better yet, when it is the practice that contributes to learning as well, there is the greater chance that it'll simply be done, and it will offer the kinds of evidence that are useful. And it is timely in two senses of the word. First of all, it happens at a time when it's meaningful to be doing it, as opposed to stopping school processes at the end of a school year at some abstract assessment moment. It is timely in that it is tied to what it is being explored. And then lastly, secondly, for time, the results are available on a schedule that makes it possible for them to be useful. Waiting 6 weeks or longer for the testing results from the moment when we stopped all school activity for 10 days to give the tests is not likely to provide. As much effort goes into by folks in school districts as well as psychometricians far and wide, pretending that they can be made useful, it's not likely that they'll be made useful in the ways that we're describing without that. And there's one last characteristic that is essential to good measurement, practical measurement for improvement. It explicitly centers variability and variation. We are as concerned about variation as we are about means, simply put. It's the only possible way to answer the question, what works for whom and under what conditions? And those are the essential questions of practical measurement for improvement. And yet, and to push it a little further, schooling should not concern itself so much with moving the mean, since we know how to move the mean very well. 45 years plus of performance testing and performance programming in Britain taught us, if nothing else, that if you want to move the mean, work with your very best students. But that's not the aims of schooling as we care about them the most. Making sure that you know what works for whom and under what conditions, so that you can craft your innovation to work for all under the conditions in which they dwell, is the recipe through which we actually care about variability as much as, and move to make progress against variability as much as we do. And simply put, improvement science has baked into its improvement science has baked into its very essence concern for equity and so forth in the form of measures that look at the question of variability.
And I'm keen to dig into enabling conditions, and we'll return to that conversation after we hear from Linda and John. Linda?
Thank you. It's great to be here. We can go to the next slide. And I want to sort of flip the script a little bit and think about assessment when it's for students primarily and for teachers, rather than for external audiences. And in the United States, we've had a number of years of shifting assessment to mostly be for external audiences since the use of assessment for a variety of school incentives and sanctions. So when we have assessment that's really for these external audiences, we've often been developing scores for judging schools or perhaps students, ranking, sorting for different programs or opportunities. Of course, in the accountability realm, allocating rewards and sanctions or interventions, determining next steps sometimes in educational options, but typically those have been from scores rather than from deep textured knowledge of students and their thinking. If we shift the purpose of assessment and the who of assessment, who is assessment for to students and for teachers, then we can think about the ways in which I want to deepen and expand assessment that is developing experiences for learning, the types of assessments that are themselves learning experiences. I'm going to talk about performance assessment. Students tackle a task and really it's an educative task. It may be that those assessment opportunities involve iterating and improvement for the students to iterate on their work, to get feedback, to improve their work. It may be that they are seeking that the tasks, the assessment opportunities are illustrating, giving students opportunities to illustrate their thinking and their learning strategies so that their teachers can figure out, given those thinking and learning strategies, how to build upon those, which is a very different kind of learning than knowing that you got a 92 on a test and then you have to figure out what that tells you where the student may have ranked, but not what they actually think and do and know. Those kinds of assessments may be designed for demonstrating competency, and as you may know, there's a movement across the states now to really move to competency-based assessments to allow students to demonstrate what they can do, not just what they can score or know. And then assessments can even be designed to develop a growth mindset and perseverance strategies by giving students the opportunity to get feedback and improve upon their work and so on. So we can think very differently, not only about the who of assessment, but the purposes. Next slide. And so when we're in this domain, I'm really focusing on curriculum embedded assessments that can educate students and teachers. Of course, we have a lot of this in the classroom, but informal assessment systems. Many countries around the world use curriculum embedded performance tasks as part of their exam systems. In England, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the International Baccalaureate System has a set of tests and tasks. Some United States states did adopt similar systems in the 1990s, and we are seeing a return to that desire now. Those tasks were allowed students to really show what they know. I'm thinking, for example, of science inquiries, which we see in other countries and we saw in many states, where students would design an investigation, conduct the investigation to meet certain parameters. We think about the Kentucky writing portfolio, where there were a set of standardized in the sense that similar tasks meeting similar standards, but students could write about what they chose to write about in a persuasive essay in a different genre around rubrics. They could improve their work, but then it could be scored. And then there are new approaches that are happening in the advanced placement context. So, for example, the advanced placement research course, which has embedded research projects, the computer science applications course, where students have a task in which they design a computer application of their choosing to meet a goal that they determine. They do it collaboratively. The assessment part of it is when they then must individually explain what they've done, evaluate, the ways in which they needed to iterate in the process and explain why that was needed. It was the deeper thinking. And this becomes very important when we think about uses of AI, both in assessment and in the world, because what we need is we have to get past the argument about, does using AI constitute cheating, and really think about how we use AI to give us a foundation of information that we can critique, evaluate, use, and then transform into new knowledge, which is the task for students, which is going to rely on them being able to engage in these kinds of assessments. So all of this, I think the AI portion of this makes all of this more doable, in part because some of these assessments were stymied to some extent previously by costs. It costs more to score open-ended complex items. It's possible to do. Many people have done it. It's possible to do it with high reliability and all of that. But there are ways to use AI both in the scoring, but in many other ways that can become part of assessment for learning rather than just assessment for ranking, scoring, etc. And I think that's part of what we need to be really leaning into. If we could go to the next slide. In some schools, there are portfolio systems for assessing students, in which students, this happens to be from the New York Performance Standards Consortium model of a portfolio, in which students have to do an open-ended, substantial project, two specifications that are the same across schools in science, investigation, sometimes a math model, social science inquiry, a literary analysis, a work-based learning or internship analysis. And the student may complete these over the course of high school, iterate and improve them, present them to a panel of judges who then ask deeper and further questions, and sometimes more iteration occurs. And we're seeing that there are now school systems and networks that are wanting to shift. You can see all of New York trying to shift its high school assessments in this direction, for example. But then the question is, how do you understand those? How do you use them for employment, for higher education, admissions, and placement? And there are now tools, AI tools emerging, both to enable the use of a digital portfolio to be collected, if you will, and then also to transmit it in ways that both identify competencies that are reflected in the portfolio and give access to the actual artifacts for those who want to see them. To the next slide. So one example of this is in a set of districts in California that are using a tool that students and teachers designed with a tech developer called eCadence that is organizing these performance assessments for teacher use. So students are engaged in performance assessment. The teacher receives those in a platform that allows them to read and score with the rubrics and then iterate with the students. They can get some help with scoring certain components of the assessments with teacher co-engagement. So it's not just handing it over to the AI, but it involves them in particular things and the teacher in particular things. I think one of the things we need to think about as we use AI in these kinds of settings is how to enable teachers to continue to be part of the scoring process, because you learn by seeing the student work, by evaluating it, but you can be assisted in ways that make it both more efficient and more similarly evaluated by using those tools. They can recommend next steps with teacher oversight. Oops. And in this particular case, the AI learns from the student work and from other things the student has shared with them and told them to support each student having their own AI tutor to learn other things and to help them and advise them as they're pursuing career paths. So there's a lot that can be done that requires, both the engagement of humans in particular ways and the engagement of the AI. And just to go to the last slide, there is a platform, many platforms being developed, but this particular one is one of the kinds of ways that AI is being used to both look at student work, authentic student work, pull out what the competencies are, make those available in summary form for higher education or for other users, but also make artifacts available, and then present these kinds of portfolios of work to higher education audiences. I think when we put the assessment for the user, for the student, in a form that is authentic, it is also socioculturally responsive to the students in the sense that they're working on the problems that come from their experience and are connected to their own sociocultural backgrounds. Then we're giving an opportunity for learning that is deeper and more appropriate to the tasks that they're going to have to do in the society that we're now entering into.
Thank you, Linda. John?
Yeah. Firstly, thanks to Eric and Ed Gordon for bringing together Eva Baker, Steve Cerisi, and myself. And if we can go to the next slide, please. To address the question of, it's more about how we think about assessment as much as it is about what we do in assessment. And what we tried to do is to look at the different ways in which we would want both teachers and test developers to think about what they do in terms of improving educational assessment. And as you can see there, and I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, but the first one, that assessments in schools need to consider both progress and achievement, the learning emotions, the strategies, the kind of things that both Ali, Linda, and Paul all mentioned, alongside what we have focused on so much over the last 20 years, and that's only achievement, which surely is the outcome of what we do and not necessarily measuring always the process and the inputs of what we do. Also, we want to, surely, if we administer any kind of assessment to a student, it's incumbent upon us to also teach the students how to interpret the results, so that they go about improvement. Because in most cases, students are improvement engines. They want to improve. And if they don't improve, they consider the test was a waste of time. So how do we think about making students' assessment capability? And I'm going to come back to that in the second part, even more so in the days of AI than it is now. How we can look at assessments, particularly on achievement in mind frame number 4, looking both at the content knowledge, the facts, the process, the rules, the procedures, and the depth knowledge, the problem solving, the relating, the connecting. And I want all of us to be greedy. I want both. And so often in schools and in measurement, we say it's one or the other. No, we want both. And surely it's a matter of sometimes having almost two forms, two kinds of assessments, one about the content and one about the knowing how side of it, and how we bring that together. How we then have an alignment between those forms of knowledge and also what we do. And what we've been doing in our work is showing that there are certain teaching methods that are much more effective with the knowing that than knowing how, and vice versa. There are certain student learning strategies that are more effective with the knowing that compared to the knowing how. And then how we teach our students to know when to use the right strategy. Next slide, please. And number 7, it's really dear to our hearts here. How do we make classrooms a place where kids come to, not because they know, they come because they don't know. So how do we make errors as opportunities to learn rather than sources of embarrassment? How do we get assessment so that if teachers give an assessment and at the end of it, they should be asking, what did I learn about what I taught well, what I didn't teach well, who I taught well, who I didn't teach well, and what was the magnitude of how much we taught? And if that doesn't happen, I'm not sure that assessment's of any value to the students. If we're not learning how to improve our impact, then it's not going to have the same transfer away in terms of the students. I want to come back to the technologies in the moment, but I want to end on mindframe 10, which is echoing exactly what Linda was saying about transforming the purpose of assessment to move away from that over-reliance we've had over the last 20 odd years of accountability to asking how does it go about that improvement cycle that Paul was talking about, both in terms of the understanding, the motivation, the skill that employers are asking for now. How do we teach our students to collaborate, work in teams and translate? I think they really are critical notions. But I think the greatest change in my lifetime is the advent of AI, for good and bad. And it's really fascinating. Next slide, please. If you go back and look at the introduction of technology, it's kind of taken 50 years from the 1970s to today before the effect of technology has had even an average effect on the achievement of our students. And I think the only question in town is why has technology been so slow? And I think that's going to inform us about AI. I think Larry Cuban has done the best and most exciting work on that. And his argument is computer technology has not really transformed or influenced the way in which we teach. Yes, it's helped us be more efficient. Yes, teachers use computers, kids use computers, but in terms of how we've taught, there's hardly been any kind of influence. And I want to ask that in terms of what we're going to do in AI. Is AI going to be another efficiency measure? Is it going to be another thing we bring into our schools, into our assessment community to do what we've been doing for the last 50 years better? Or is it going to transform how we go about doing things? Next slide. I think it can tip the focus. And if nothing else, our students are well ahead of us in terms of how we do it. I think it can tip the focus in terms of feedback from assessment, from seeing feedback as something we do in particular moments to something that's a continuous support. Yes, we need guardrails. I wish we'd had the discussion 10 years ago when social media came in about guardrails, and I think we've paid an enormous price for not having that. And so there are bad things, incredibly bad things that come from AI, and I hope they don't mitigate and cause people to say, therefore, I'm not going to use it. There are also wonderful things. Surprise, there's already 20 meta-analysis on the effects of AI. In fact, since I did that analysis 4 months ago, there's now been 50 meta-analyses, which doubles the rate of learning at 0.74. And that's primarily because it's doing what we've been doing in measurement for the last 30 years much more transparently and given it into the hands of teachers. All the feedback work out there, all the tutoring work out there that many have worked on many years. And many of that has overemphasized the surface features of what students to do. And that is an incredibly valuable thing. But I want more. I also want it to look at the ways in which we process, we integrate, we look at how students collaborate and work together, their learning strategies. And I think the adage which many have put forward before me is that AI will not replace a teacher. A teacher using AI will replace a teacher. Next slide. And I think one of the most critical things that we need to worry about is how we make sure that human stays in the middle. I'm always surprised when I talk to audiences of teachers of how few are using AI, for example, in lesson planning, provided they're in the middle, because it can do 80% of the hard work, provided we worry about quality control. And this is going to be a revolution in assessment too, as we find ways to help teachers create better assessments, provided once again, going back, looking at the kind of things Ali was talking about, Paul was talking about, we have very clear criteria about what quality means. I worry that, like technology, we're going to wait. We're going to wait and see what happens. And we're going to pay the price of our students getting ahead of us. And our conversation is going to be about cheating, about hallucinations, about all these kinds of notions. And my hunch and my challenge to you today is to turn the question on its head and say, right now, what are the skills we need to successfully teach our students and our teachers to use AI in very effective ways? And next slide. And I have a list. Oh, it's gone. I have a list of ideas about what those ideas are. For example, questioning. We know that teachers in classrooms are the ones that ask questions. I'm sorry, On AI, if you ask a question, the wrong question, you get the wrong result. We need to teach our students how to ask questions, particularly probing questions. Think about quality control. Who right now controls what is taught, when it's taught, how long it's taught for, what the assessments, assignments are? The teacher. Using AI, we've got to teach our students. How do they know it's right and wrong? How do they know it's good enough? How do they go about getting critique? We have to teach them about how to deal with error management, to seek help, to worry about whether the next choices that AI recommends are the optimal. And the challenge I put out to you all here in this community is how do we think about assessment in this day of AI? How do we think about the criteria and nature of the task that we want our students and skills we want our students to have in the day of AI? Because I can guarantee one thing, if we don't do that, our students will get miles ahead of us and we'll be continuing catch-up mode and we've missed the most incredible opportunity given to us to truly make a transformation and improvement in our schools.
Thank you, John. Well, each of the panelists have had the opportunity to cross-pollinate and hear from each other. And in this last stretch before the top of the hour, I'd like to ask each of the panelists for closing reflections and remarks. So 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the outer bound. Given what you've heard from your colleagues, what do you want to leave our audience and friends and colleagues with today? Ellie, we'll start with you.
Thank you for that. Well, I have to say I've really enjoyed listening to my co-presenters talk about their work. Obviously, a lot of synergies between what we're all thinking about and working on. One of the things that I think about as an economist by training is the ways in which the incentive structure is set up for how AI is built sets it up to not necessarily deliver on this future vision that we have outlined. You know, John was talking about the ways in which AI could be used to link to pedagogical strategies and error management. And right now, what large language models are set up to do is much more related to marketing and profit margins and not necessarily making pedagogically relevant insights. And thinking about what that means as a funder, thinking about what needs to happen to make sure that AI is set up to help deliver on this potential future state so that it doesn't become another missed opportunity or worse, resemble more how the social media unguardrailed implications for young people. So that's where my mind is at right now. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to come and speak and listen.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, very quickly. Two thoughts, actually. One of them is simple, or at least simply suggested, not easily enacted, and that is think systems of use. They are as important to me as anything. Systems of use. Where's the evidence go? How is it processed? How is it used, et cetera, et cetera, and build the routines and the norms and the routines, norms per John's suggestion, routines per Linda's, that both build and enact systems of use. My second thought is much larger, I guess, or a little more diffuse. And that is, it gets me thinking yet again about what the leader's role is in all of this. What is it that we would ask of leaders to see all of this in meaningfully enacted in reality? Because leaders without a agenda of what to do are dangerous things indeed. And I guess what I would say, my guidance for leaders comes close to 20, 30 now, years ago, when Admiral Denny Blair once said to me, he was the sink of the Pacific Fleet, US Navy. He once said to me, leaders should do only those things that only the leader can do. My addendum, because if the leader is doing more than that, she is doing somebody else's job for them. And if she does any less than that, important things aren't getting done. So I look at what all needs to be done and I say, what part of that is a leader's responsibility? And it comes down to this: setting direction, teaching the system and enforcing the values that that ensure that we get where we're trying to get in ways that we are proud of and can live with. These kind of building systems for unleashing talent and creating structural supports where structural supports are needed. This is what we turn to leaders to do. If they do any more than that, they're doing the principal's job or even the teacher's job. And systems don't work well with everybody doing the teacher's job.
Thank you. Linda?
I think that there's a lot of ways that we're going to continue to be learning about what AI could do to make assessment easier and in some ways fairer with speech to text technologies and lots of ways for learners to communicate and to help with scoring and that kind of thing. But I think unless we change the frame of assessment from we ask you a bunch of short questions that you give us answers to we actually want to see you in the process of doing and learning for learners, we won't get the value that we could be getting out of this. And I loved two of the comments at the end of the chat here about what we want students to be able to do. We want them to be able to demonstrate that they can think deeply and inquire and make thoughtful inferences and improve their own work and be learners. And Jim Goodall says, what did we think about the value of equipping young learners with knowledge about how people learn to empower their agency as lifelong learners, shift to a mindset that learning is something learners do rather than what is done to them. And I think when you engage learners in authentic tasks that are meaningful to them, that are part of their own, sort of schema for what needs to be learned in the world, they not only, and if you do that, as John said, with quality indicators, rubrics, the right kind of feedback mechanisms, and so on, then you are teaching them to be learners and to be enactors of the learning themselves. And then Christina Everett had the last word in the chat, at least on my screen. It allows students more agency in their own learning and sets them up to be lifelong learners. And I think that should be the goal. Assessment that is really for learning, for developing learners, for teaching them to be, self-improving learners, to Paul's, schema and framework that he provided us. And to get out of the business of saying, how many of these answers can you remember, that you might have, little factoids that you might remember from a moment in time, which we know doesn't add up to the capacity to manipulate and manage knowledge, and to get things done in the world.
Thank you. John?
I just want to riff on that comment of Jim's as well. We have about 12,000 hours of classroom observation with transcripts. And one of the questions we asked is how many times across 12,000 hours, which is almost a student's lifetime in school, does a teacher think aloud, or does a teacher ask a student to think aloud? And our answer was zero. Classrooms are not places where there's thinking. And I think this is where AI can have a tremendous advantage. Yes, I want the test people to use AI to do what we're doing now better. But the point is, as Jim said, how do we get AI to help expose the learning? And I call my work visible learning, not because the learning is visible. It's because I want to make it more visible, because that's what the students are fascinated with. How did you do that? Tell me what you did. That is not what happens in our classrooms at the moment. So I am very optimistic that if we get this right, we can truly make a difference, and we might actually get ahead of our students using AI rather than catching up. I think the core skill is how do we evaluatively think, not only for teachers, but also for students.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you to Professor Edmund Gordon for teeing up this question around placing learners and educators and families at the center of the value proposition for assessment. Thank you to each of you for spending this hour with us and for being a part of this growing community of educators and researchers committed to reimagining assessment to upgrade how we understand and design to empower learning. We hope today's discussion sparked ideas that you'll carry forward in your own practice, and we hope that you'll stay in touch and that we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.